stories rise whispering, the echoes from the lone.
Welcome, wayward souls, wanderers of the winding paths and keepers of the quiet hours, to another descent into the places where the fog gathers thick and the old stories breathe just beneath the soil. If the shadows have been kind to you lately, if the night has whispered something worth remembering, or if you've simply found a spark of wonder in the dark, let your support ripple outward. Like, share and follow so these tales can travel further into the hollows where they're almost at home. Now settle in, steady your breath. The mountains are listening and the road ahead is already but shifting beneath your feet. So light your lanterns, brace yourself, and don't lose your head. Night lay over the hills like a thick pelt, heavy and matted with mist. Joseph Signet guided his truck along the narrow mountain road, the headlights slicing a thin, trembling path through the dark. The forest crowded close on both sides, branches leaning inwards, eavesdropping on his passage. Even the air felt watchful. Joseph knew these roads the way a man knows the lines on his own hands, every bend, every dip, every place where the asphalt buckled under the winter frost. But tonight, the familiar route felt hollowed out, as though something had scooped the life from the land and left only the shell behind. No insects, no night birds, no distant rustle of deer moving through the brush. Only the hum of the engine and the faint, unsettling thudding that pulsed from somewhere deep in the trees. Fog began to gather along the road, first in thin, ghostly strands, then in dense, rolling banks that swallowed the truck's lights. It didn't drift like normal fog, it crept. It crawled and it moved with purpose, as though drawn towards the warmth of the engine. The thudding grew louder. Not footsteps, not quite, more deliberate, like the slow impact of something massive meeting the earth. A rhythm too steady to be natural, and too patient to be human. Joseph rounded the bend and the world narrowed to a single impossible shape. Something stood in the centre of the road. Huge, pale, smooth as river stone. Its skin reflected the headlights in a dull, sickly sheen. It had the rough outline of a man, but stretched and swollen as though carved from flesh that had forgotten how to be human. Broad shoulders and thick arms that hung too low, and a torso that rose higher than the cab of the truck. But no head. Just a column of flesh ending abruptly where a neck should have been, as though something had torn the top away long ago, and the body had simply learned to continue without it. The surface of its skin pulsed faintly, rising and falling in a slow, wet rhythm, breathing somehow through the meat of its own body. Joseph's foot slammed the brake and the truck skidded, tires screaming against the asphalt. The creature didn't react, it didn't flinch, it just stood there, oriented towards him with a stillness. The engine spluttered once and then died. Silence rushed in, thick and suffocating. The fog curled around the creature's legs, clinging to it like something grateful for the warmth. And the thing shifted, not turning or looking, but aligning itself with the truck in a way that made Joseph's skin crawl. The air tightened as though the night itself recoiled from the thing in the road. And the thudding resumed. closer now, but not from the creature in front of him, from the trees behind. Something else was moving out there, something heavy, something dragging that left the leaves trembling in its wake. Joseph sat frozen, breath shallow, as the pale figure in the headlights took a single, deliberate step towards him. The ground trembled beneath its weight, the fog shivered, and somewhere in the dark, a low, wet, dragging sound began. The kind of sound that suggested something being pulled through the undergrowth. The truck sat dead on the road like a gutted animal, its lights dimming as the battery surrendered to the cold weight of the night. Joseph felt the air inside the cab thicken with the kind of stillness that arrives only when the world outside has decided to hold its breath. The pale, headless figure in the road continued its slow, unnatural breathing. The rise and fall of its torso creating a faint, wet sound that seemed to seep into the fog. Joseph's hands hovered over the steering wheel, not gripping it, just simply resting in a state of suspended instinct. Because some part of him understood that any sudden movement might draw the creature's attention in a way he wouldn't survive. The fog pressed against the windshield in thick shifting layers, and the headlights, fading fast, cast a weak, trembling glow that barely reached the creature's knees. And the rest of its towering form loomed in a silhouette that felt impossibly solid, as though carved from the mountains itself. The thudding from the trees grew heavier, each impact sending a faint tremor through the ground beneath the truck, and Joseph realized with a slow, creeping dread that whatever moved out there was not attempting to hide its presence. It advanced with the confidence of something that had never needed to fear the things that lived on two legs, and the sound of its approach carried a dragging undertone. Leaves shifted in long, shuddering waves, and branches bent under a weight that did not belong to any creature Joseph had ever seen. The headless figure in the road responded to the approaching sound with a subtle shift of its massive frame, its torso angling slightly towards the tree line, and the movement revealed a faint distortion along the surface of its skin. A ripple that travelled across its chest, like something beneath the flesh stirred in response. The fog recoiled from the motion, pulling back in thin, reluctant strands, and Joseph felt a cold pressure settle at the base of his skull. A primal warning that whatever existed between the trees was not merely another creature of the night, but something that shaped the silence itself. The dragging sound grew louder, accompanied now by a faint, irregular tapping, as though something hard struck against roots and stones with each uneven pull. Joseph strained to see through the fog, but the darkness beyond the headlights remained impenetrable, a dense wall of shadow that swallowed every detail. Yet he could sense movement, a slow, deliberate shifting of mass. The headless figure took another step toward the truck, its footfall sending a dull vibration through the metal frame, and Joseph felt the air inside the cab tighten, further compressing around his ribs until each breath became a shallow, trembling effort. The creature's skin glistened faintly in the dying light. Somewhere, deep in the fog, a low, resonant groan rose from the undergrowth. Joseph felt the hair on his arms lift as though the night itself had brushed against him. The dragging grew louder still, accompanied by a faint wet friction that suggested the forest floor was being disturbed, and the scent of overturned soil drifted through the cracked window. The headless figure paused, its massive frame held in a posture that suggested listening, and the fog around its legs began to swirl in slow spiraling currents, as though drawn towards the unseen presence. Joseph remained motionless, his breath shallow and his pulse thundering in his ears, because he understood now that he was caught between two forces that did not belong to the world he knew. And the night had grown too dense and too hungry to allow him the illusion of safety. The forest shifted again, and something enormous was almost at the edge of the road. Joseph realized the creature in the headlights had not been blocking his path. It had been waiting. Fog thickened until it felt less like weather and more like a living presence. A slow-moving shroud that drifted across the road with the patience of something that had waited a very long time to be acknowledged. And Joseph felt the weight of it pressing against the truck's windows, as though the night itself were attempting to seep inside. The pale headless figure stood only a few paces from the front bumper now, its immense form rising out of the swirling mist like a monument carved from flesh. And the faint rhythmic expansion of its torso continued with a steady persistence, because the sound of that breathing carried a damp resonance that suggested the creature's lungs were not shaped for air alone. The dragging sound in the trees shifted, and Joseph realized with a creeping sense of horror that whatever moved through that undergrowth was no longer approaching in a straight line, but circling, as though tracing the edge of the road with a slow, predatory curiosity. Branches bowed under its weight, releasing showers of brittle leaves that drifted into the fog like ash. And the forest floor groaned beneath the strain of something that did not care how deeply it carved its passage into the soil. The tapping sound returned, irregular and unsettling, as though something hard and uneven struck against roots and stones with each dragging pull. And Joseph felt the vibration of it through the metal frame of the truck. A faint tremor that travelled up his spine and settled behind his eyes. The headless figure responded to the movement with a subtle shift, in a way that suggested recognition rather than fear. The fog recoiled from the motion, pulling back again, revealing the faint outline of the creature's arms, which hung at its sides with a heaviness that implied strength rather than fatigue. Joseph felt a cold pressure settle in his throat as he realized the creature was not preparing to flee or defend itself. It was just waiting, as though the thing in the trees was not an enemy, but a companion. A low groan rose from the undergrowth, deeper and more resonant than before, carrying with it the unmistakable sound of something straining against its own weight. The dragging grew louder, mingled with a faint metallic tang that seeped through the windows and made Joseph's stomach tighten with instinctive recognition of something he did not want to name. The fog parted and something vast moved just beyond the reach of the headlights, its shape obscured by shadow and mist, but its presence unmistakable. Joseph could not see its form clearly, only the suggestion of immense mass and the faint glimmer of something pale dragging behind it. The headless figure took another step toward the truck, its footfall sending that vibration through the ground again, and the fog around the legs swirled in response, drawn still towards that unseen presence in the trees, as though the two beings shared a breath. The dragging stopped and the forest fell silent, and Joseph understood with a clarity that hollowed him out from the inside. The creature in the road had not been the danger. It had been the law. The fog shifted, deliberately and slowly, as though the night had peeled itself open, just enough to reveal the shape that had been moving through the trees. And Joseph felt the air inside the cab grow colder still, in a way that suggested the temperature drop was not caused by weather, but by proximity to something that did not belong in the living world. The pale, headless figure in the road remained unnervingly still, its immense form still angled towards the tree line, with a posture that conveyed neither fear nor aggression, but expectancy. The dragging resumed again, releasing showers of brittle leaves, and the undergrowth parted with a reluctant shudder, and a shape formed, not fully visible but not fully concealed. Joseph could not discern its outline, only the suggestion of immense bulk. The scent of disturbed earth grew stronger, mingled with its metallic sweetness that made Joseph's stomach tighten. The headless figure responded with a slow, deliberate movement, lifting one massive arm in a gesture that did not resemble a warning, but something closer to acknowledgement. The fog around its legs swirled in spiraling currents, and Joseph felt the pressure shift, as though the night itself begun to tilt, and the shape in the trees stepped forward. Joseph saw enough to understand the creature in the road had not been the most disturbing thing waiting for him tonight. The second thing was larger, its form distorted by the mist but unmistakably massive, with limbs that moved in slow, uneven arcs, as though they'd been assembled without regard for symmetry or balance. And something pale dragged behind it, long and heavy, leaving a deep furrow in the soil. And Joseph felt a cold wave of nausea rise in his throat as he realized the dragging object was not a part of the creature's body, but something it carried. Something limp and misshapen. Something the fog desperately tried to conceal. The headless figure took another step towards the truck, positioning itself between Joseph and the emerging shape. Not as protector, but as participant in a ritual Joseph could not comprehend. The air grew thick with tension, and the two beings faced one another across the narrow strip of asphalt. And Joseph felt the weight of their presence settle over him like a shroud, suffocating and absolute. Forest fell silent, and Joseph understood with a clarity that this was not a chance encounter, but a crossing point, a place where things that should never meet had chosen to converge, and the night had no intention of letting him leave. The larger creature at the tree line shifted its immense weight, revealing more of the pale object dragging behind it. And although the fog obscured the details, Joseph could see enough to understand. The thing being pulled across the forest floor had once possessed the shape that belonged to the living. Though whatever it had been was now twisted into a form that no longer resembled anything capable of breath. The headless figure in the road responded with a slow, deliberate movement, lifting its arm in a gesture that was ritualistic. And the fog around its legs swirled again, almost pulling the larger creature towards it. The larger creature stepped fully into the road, its form distorted by the mist. Joseph couldn't see it clearly, but he could make out just how massive this creature was. The scent of disturbed earth created a cloying heaviness, made Joseph's eyes water and his breath hitch in his throat. The two beings faced one another, and the larger creature released the pale object, letting it slump onto the asphalt with a soft, wet sound that made Joseph's stomach twist. And the fog curled around it, as though attempting to hide the evidence of whatever violence had shaped it. The headless figure leaned forward slightly, and the surface of its skin rippled again. A more pronounced movement this time, that suggested something beneath the flesh was shifting into place. The headless figure reached out towards the pale object on the road, and the larger creature stepped back into the fog. Joseph understood that whatever happened next was not meant for human eyes. The night seemed to contract around the narrow strip of road, as though the darkness itself were drawing a breath. The two creatures stood in a tableau that felt older than the mountains and infinitely more patient. The larger being had retreated only a few paces into the fog, its immense form still visible in the shifting mist, and the pale object it had dragged from the forest lay sprawled on the asphalt in a posture that suggested a body, but forced into shapes it had never meant to hold. Joseph's stomach twisted with the instinctive recognition of suffering long past the point of mercy. The headless figure approached the object with a slow, deliberate gait, its massive frame moving with a weight that made the asphalt tremble. The fog recoiled from the creature's presence, and Joseph felt his breath catch again. He noticed faint impressions along the body's surface, shallow indentations that suggested the forest floor had not been the only thing dragging against it. The headless figure lowered itself with a slow, almost reverent motion, and Joseph watched as it extended one massive arm toward the pale object. The movement smooth and unhurried, as though the creature were performing ritual rather than an act of violence. He felt a wave of nausea rise as the creature's hand made contact with the body. The larger creature hiding in the fog shifted its weight, releasing a low resonant groan, and the headless figure responded with a subtle tilt of its torso. And with a slow, deliberate motion, it began to lift the pale object from the asphalt. The body rose in uneven increments, limbs dangling in ways that suggested joints had long since ceased to function. And Joseph felt his vision blur as he realized the creature was not simply moving the body, but examining it. The fog thickened again around the scene, swirling in dense, shifting layers that obscured the finer details. But Joseph could still make out the faint suggestion of the creature's hand pressing against the body's surface, tracing contours of limbs that had been bent and twisted. And the implied violence of those movements made his skin crawl with a dread that felt physical. The larger creature released another groan, and the headless figure responded by lifting the body higher, its massive arms cradling the limp form with a care that felt profoundly wrong. The air grew colder still, and Joseph's chest tightened as the headless figure turned towards the fog, presenting the body to the larger creature with a slow, deliberate motion. The fog swirled in response, and Joseph understood that he was witnessing a moment of exchange, a passing of something that did not belong to the living. The headless figure held the body aloft, and the larger creature stepped forward. The night seemed to fold inward as the two creatures completed their silent exchange, the fog drawing close around them in a way that suggested the darkness itself wished to conceal whatever ancient ritual was taking place. The headless figure still held the pale, twisted body aloft, and the larger creature lingered at the edge of the road, its immense silhouette shifting in the fog with a slow, uneven rhythm that suggested anticipation. Joseph remained frozen in the driver's seat, hands resting uselessly on the steering wheel, body locked in paralysis. The fog pressed against the windows, and Joseph felt the weight of the moment settle over him like a burial shroud, suffocating, as though the world had narrowed to the thin strip of the road and the two beings that occupied it and nothing else. The headless figure lowered the body with a deliberate motion, placing it on the asphalt with a care that suggested reverence. The larger creature shifted its weight, and Joseph felt the metal beneath him tremble. The headless figure turned, but this time not towards the larger creature, towards the truck, towards Joseph. The movement was slow, almost grateful. The faint rippling beneath the skin, the subtle undulations. Joseph felt his pulse hammer against his ribs, each beat a frantic plea for escape, but his body refused to respond, held in place by a dread so deep it felt carved into his bones. The creature took a step towards the truck, and Joseph realized he was part of the exchange. The fog pressed harder against the windows. The creature wanted him, not as prey or as witness, but as a replacement. The realization struck him with a force that made his vision blur, and Joseph felt a cold wave of dread wash through him as he finally understood the pale, twisted body on the road had not been a victim but a vacancy, a role that needed filling, a shape that had been emptied to make room for something new. The headless figure stepped closer, its massive form looming over the hood of the truck, and Joseph felt the metal beneath him groan as though the vehicle itself were begging him to flee. Fog surged and the creature reached for the door, and Joseph, in the final moment before the handle turned, saw something in the reflection of the windshield. Its own silhouette, standing behind him, headless. Fog never truly lives in places like this. It only settles deeper into the soil, waiting for the next set of footsteps. Out on the road beyond Grafton, the asphalt will cool, the trees will straighten, and the night creatures will return to their quiet, careful lives. But the marks left behind, the furrows in the dirt, the impressions in the gravel, places where the forest refused to grow back, those remain. Some say Joseph Signet vanished without a trace. Others whisper the truck was found with the doors locked from the inside and the engine cold. And a few, the ones who know the old stories, the ones who listen when the mountains speak, claim they've seen a figure wandering the back roads on fog-heavy nights, tall and pale and impossibly still, moving with the slow certainty of something that has forgotten how to be human. If you ever find yourself driving those narrow Appalachian roads after dark, keep your eyes on the tree line. Don't slow down for shapes in the fog. Don't stop for anything that stands too still. And if you feel the night leaning towards you, if you sense the breath of something that has no mouth, if you hear the soft, deliberate thud of footsteps that don't belong, keep going. Some rituals just aren't meant to be witnessed, and some witnesses are never meant to return. Till next time, wanderers, tread lightly where the fog gathers.